And now we're going to turn it into our first topic, rebuilding transatlantic economic cooperation for global recovery. And I am delighted to hand it over shortly to our moderator, Dr. Alexis Crow, who is a senior fellow with the Council's GeoEconomics Center and the lead of geopolitical investing at PwC. Alexis, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome, over to you.
Thanks so much, Damon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. It's such an honor and privilege to be with you all today and to join you on this virtual panel. Obviously, we have the Social Summit happening virtually in Porto, and I think it is a historic moment in terms of the potential for cooperation across the Atlantic, for which our wonderful Atlantic Council is founded. So thank you all for joining our distinguished panel today. We have today the insights from His Excellency, Senor Ambassador Fezas Vital, from Senator Chris Van Hollen, and from Daniel Ahn. So we've got an action-packed 30 minutes to be able to cover the entire transatlantic economy and various national responses. So firstly, I'd love to hear from the Ambassador and the Senator. In the World Economic Outlook that the IMF has recently just put out, through various calculations, the IMF has estimated that the contraction that we would have faced on a global basis would have been 3 times as deep had we not had the extraordinary monetary and fiscal stimulus that were thrown at the problem. And truly, for those of us who were around for the last crisis, the lessons learned were that nothing is too big to fail. So I want to start with Senor Ambassador. What are some of the hallmark tenets of the economic and relief packages that we've seen, both from an EU, Eurozone basis, as well as from Portugal?
Alexis, thank you very much. Let me start by compliment the Atlantic Council and the EU delegation for this very timely initiative, and all my colleagues in the panel. I think that lessons learned is the key word. Much of what we've approved at the European level is determined by lessons learned from the financial and economic crisis in 2008 and 2009. And so I would say that the 3 main concerns were, first of all, to keep jobs, keep people working, learning from the political consequences of what we did in 2008, 2009, keep our corporate sector alive, and to use this opportunity to start preparing for what we see is the inevitable pattern of the new economic paradigm in the future. And I'm talking about the green and the digital transitions. And so I would say that this translated into a very significant, a very sizable financial package that includes not only a new budget for the European Union, but a special package to ensure that this transition, this digital and green transition, is as smooth as possible. It comes together, of course, with some requirements that all member states will have to fulfill to make sure that they accede to these amounts and to this package. And so I'm talking about the national resilience and recovery national plans. If you add up all these financial packages and instruments, we would reach a total amount of more than $8 trillion in financial packages and instruments that have been approved, and we hope to see on the ground in the very near future.
Thank you, obrigada. Senator Van Hollen, you've been on a roller coaster of a ride as we had successive, bipartisan gridlock to get things done in 2020, and now this historic $1.9 trillion package. What are some of the key things that jump out at you that have been lasting hallmarks that we might look back in terms of economic history and say this really did jumpstart the U.S. economic recovery?
Well, Dr. Crow, it's great to be with you. Great to be with Ambassador Vital and Dr. Ahn. And thank you to the Atlantic Council and the EU for bringing us together. And as you indicated, we have learned, I think, from our past. We did it and on a bipartisan basis initially. About a year ago, we passed the CARES Act, which was about a $1.7 trillion package. In December, then we passed another $900 million package. But a lot of us and President Biden believe that, again, looking to what happened after the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, we really needed that extra boost. And that was the American Rescue Plan. And all told, just on the fiscal side, setting aside the Federal Reserve's action, which were also very significant, on the fiscal side, we've invested $5.6 trillion in the recovery. I should also point out that Secretary Yellen has moved forward with special drawing rights at the IMF, because we do believe that it's important to try to boost the global economy, $650 billion, which the previous administration had refused to extend. And of course, beating the pandemic on a global basis is going to be important. So the United States is now committed $4 billion to COVAX, the first $2 billion being made available. We want others to step up. The EU has been stepping up, and so have others. So those are all important things. In terms of the lasting impact, look, the most important thing is that we're getting the economy, we're beating the pandemic. We have provided relief to people who have been hardest hit, from small businesses to workers. And the latest American Rescue Plan really, I think, will give the economy a boost. We saw in March 916,000 jobs created, and unemployment at 6%. Any moment now, we expect to see the numbers from the last month, but things are looking up. But we have to remain focused as a world, and the EU and the United States on beating this pandemic going forward. In terms of lasting impact, the bills passed today are primarily focused on relief, although I will say that there are some important long-term capital investments in the area of high-speed internet, broadband. Local jurisdictions have gotten significant funds for water and sewer modernization. And as you know, and we can talk about it later if you want, President Biden has put two major initiatives on the table: the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan, which are more focused on that long-term structural changes, both on infrastructure as well as on the human capital side. So a lot of activity, and we do look forward to coordinating as much as possible with our European partners.
Thank you so much, Senator. I think something critical that jumped out at me as well was just, making childcare affordable, and the extent to which, the IMF also highlights the fact that working women have really been left behind in this crisis. So I think that's something really tangible that comes out from relief to recovery. I'm going to turn to Dr. An, because there's a lot of debate about overheating. And obviously, this is the topic du jour amongst econ nerds like ourselves, and I'm including you in that. Is there a risk of overheating? Senator mentioned Secretary Yellen, and obviously there have been some comments this week about rates. What's your outlook for inflation in the US and potentially also the Eurozone?
Well, thank you, Alexis, for the great question. And first of all, thank you to you and to the Atlantic Council for inviting me on such a fantastic panel, and real pleasure to be here alongside my distinguished co-panelists. Indeed, we are in the middle of the great overheating debate, as we're calling it. And in many ways, it is a testament to the success of fiscal authorities in supporting aggregate demand and supporting incomes and really trying to rescue the economy. Senator Van Hollen already mentioned all of the fiscal support. Just to put that in a bit of context, since the beginning of the pandemic, the US federal government has spent over 25% of GDP on COVID-related fiscal relief. That's more spending in about 1 year than in all 4 years of World War II combined. So that is a really fantastic and very robust support. So in some ways, it is no surprise that American aggregate demand has roared back, and we are seeing massive strength in across the board in retail sales, in ISM kind of manufacturing and services. Now is where the rubber hits the road, and where supply needs to come to catch up to meet all of this demand. And while we're in this period of excess demand over supply, inflation naturally kind of emerges, and we're seeing that through price pressures in the system. And this is why I think, therefore, it's so important that the Senator and His Excellency and authorities around the world are now moving toward trying to address the supply side through public investment and things to allow for a more robust and productive kind of recovery of suppliers and companies to meet all of this robust demand and help bring some of these price pressures under control in a way that precludes the need for a more disorderly kind of intervention by central banks.
Thank you, Dr. And I also have a question around financial vulnerability. We're still very much in the relief status. We still remain in the teeth of the pandemic in many countries. What are some potential financial vulnerabilities lurking beneath the system? The ambassador mentioned keeping the corporate sector alive. There's a lot of talk about zombie companies within the Eurozone. Here in the US, obviously the Fed giving warnings about hidden leverage. What's popping up for you? Right.
As usual, generals can only fight the last war, although they try to think hard about the next one. Certainly in terms of a number of kind of macro sort of economic leverage signals, there are some warning lights here and there, but overall, I think the Fed is pretty confident that at least the banking system overall, which played such a role in not just the severity, but also duration of the Great Recession, is now in much healthier shape. Nevertheless, I'm kind of worried when I see things like Dogecoin, which started off as a bit of a thought exercise, is kind of going out of control. This is, I think, part and parcel of a period where central banks have been struggling to actually get inflation to be back on a sustainable path. In doing so, and in maintaining such accommodative financial conditions for so long, you naturally see kind of speculative assets kind of appreciate in the search for yield. So it's my hope that as the economy kind of continues to propel onward with supply recovering and productive capacity repairing, and not just everyone going out to spend their stimulus checks, that yield will indeed come back in a productive way. Investors, companies, all that can find new opportunities for real return investment, and not having to be searching for the next kind of tulip bulb type speculative investment to deliver the yields and returns that they need for future wealth creation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So turning to the geopolitical landscape, we often have these discussions about transatlantic relations across the Atlantic. And of course, we're increasingly thinking about across the Pacific. As the EU and the US start to engage on China, and I think clearly we're seeing much more cooperation, what are some of the potential cohesion points? What are some of the potential diverging or points of contention that would disrupt cohesion at a Eurozone, US level, as well as bilateral? Senor Ambassador, I will turn to you first on EU-China.
Thanks very much, Alexis. I think that's a very good question, but let's not focus on China only. I think that what is at stake is the level of cooperation between the two sides of the Atlantic, to be frank. I believe that you can see two levels here. Our cooperation in multilateral fora, and that means talking about China at that level as well. So if you talk about the WTO reform, or what to do at the OECD level, for instance, of course, you're talking about the future of our relationship, not only between ourselves, between the two sides of the Atlantic, but also in our relation with third parties. And I will come back to this. And the second one is the bilateral cooperation stricto sensu. And I would say that as part of the proposal submitted by the European Union to the United States. One of them is the setting up of a council, a trade and technology council. And we believe that this is our main priority. This should be our main priority here. As we all know, things have improved quite substantially recently in our bilateral relations. I would say the mood, but not only the mood. We've already taken some very significant measures on both sides of the Atlantic. Let's just think about the suspension of the tariffs within the framework of the Airbus-Boeing dispute. But we still have some irritants there, some pending issues that we have to address. And so we believe that it's very important that we set up this council to discuss not only these pending issues, but also the relations between the two blocs with third countries and parties and regions, including China. And as I said, let me come back to this, because I think there is a very important element that I do not see that much mentioned, which is what's going on between the European Union as such and third countries and regions, and what the United States has been doing on his side, on its side, with third countries and regions. You see news on summits with the Quad members, for instance, the United States and Quad members in the Indo-Pacific region. You see the European Union talking to the Mercosur, to Mexico, to Africa, to even some countries in Asia, negotiating trade agreements. I think that this trade and technology council should also serve as a forum to discuss what we are doing with third countries and regions to make sure that what we decide and agree with these third countries and regions do not come to hamper the bilateral relationship and cooperation. We should not be confronted, from the US side or the European side, with the other side having agreed something with a third country or region that at the end of the day will make our bilateral relationship more difficult. So I would say that this is where the challenge lies, and everything points to the importance of setting up this council as soon as possible.
Muito obrigada. Senator Van Hollen, what about US-China as a point of cohesion, cooperation between the EU and the US?
Well, I agree with the ambassador that the first step is to set up this kind of council on trade and technology and the whole range of issues that we're confronting. When it comes to the challenge of China, I see this in sort of three parts. One is that we've got to do better at home, both the United States and the EU, in terms of making those cutting edge investments. I mean, China has, of course, its Made in China 2025 plan. In many ways, they're copying a successful model that we pursued in the United States and Europe for years when it came to investing in key technologies that led to semiconductors, led to the internet. So you do have bipartisan support right now in the Congress. I hope it will continue on a major investment initiative in things like AI, quantum computing, clean technologies, the whole range of sort of current and next generation technologies. I teamed up with a Republican to direct the National Academies of Sciences and Engineering to do every 2 years a report, so we can begin to really focus on the gaps. I think the gap in 5G was a lesson. It just was negligence, in my view, that the United States and Europe did not have more options available there, and China sought to fill the gap. So we have to invest at home, and that includes in education and other fundamental issues. I do think we need to cooperate when it comes to technology transfer. We have, of course, the CFIUS process. The United States, Europe is working on, has a similar structure. I think we need to better coordinate all of that. When it comes to key and strategic technologies like 5G, I do think we need to better coordinate in terms of setting standards. We all know that China is able to use concentrated, centralized government power to try to make investments around the world, and then use that leverage to push countries around. And we've seen in Australia, for example, the leverage that China's tried to use to prevent Australia from criticizing China's actions in Hong Kong and elsewhere. So for those countries like the EU and the United States who believe in the rule of law, who believe in open societies, who believe in democracy, we really do need to work together. And finally, as the ambassador said, I think we should look at regions. I just returned from Sudan yesterday morning, and the United States is going to be working to try to encourage and support this transition from dictatorship to democracy. And they have the Paris conference coming up soon. So I do believe that when it comes to countering things like the Belt and Road Initiative, we can also work together to better coordinate some of our international assistance and investment efforts. So lots of room for working together here to meet that challenge.
Thank you so much, Senator. Daniel, I'd like to turn to you on the outlook for taxation. Obviously, there's a lot of debate about fiscal sustainability, how we're going to pay for all these bumper stimulus packages. And now we've had Secretary Yellen at the IMF meetings talking about, a global minimum tax, preventing a race to the bottom. Some within the OECD have spoken about this being a potential bone of contention for some of the lower tax jurisdictions in Europe. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think this is actually achievable and sustainable? And what would be the impact in EU-US relations?
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question, Alexis, and something that I'm very much wondering and hopeful myself. I look back to the very first lecture, day one of Public Finance 101, as taught by my old advisor, the late Professor Marty Feldstein of Harvard. And he said that good tax systems are simple, they're efficient, and they're fair. And are currently, I think, both domestically within the US, but especially in the international kind of multilateral sort of sense, we are somewhat far away from that goal. And I think that this sort of initiative to try and harmonize and fill various loopholes in the multinational tax scheme is one that is long awaited and very much necessary. With all, not while accepting all the hard work of my former colleagues at the State Department and also the Treasury Department, et cetera, I have great confidence in their skills. We all know just how challenging multilateral negotiations can be, especially one when there's also domestic political negotiations, as the Senator I'm sure can attest. So it's a kind of multi-dimensional board game of chess here, where international discussions are kind of proceeding simultaneously with domestic sort of political negotiations. It is a very complicated system. I hope that a kind of grand resolution and grand bargain can indeed happen, but we should also be realistic about the challenges of all of this.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're coming to the end of time. I'm going to turn to each of you for 90 seconds to share what would be your top priority policies for EU-US cooperation. So obviously we've covered digital quite deeply. Senor Ambassador, over to you first, top priorities.
I would say that the top priority is to solve the pending issues. I think that we cannot build the future without sorting out what's on the table now.
Okay, wonderful. Senator Van Hollen?
Well, I do agree that we should establish this council to have much more intense coordination. Look, as Dr. An said, we all know the challenges, and it will require political will to overcome those challenges. I'm glad you asked the question about trying to harmonize our sort of corporate taxes, as you know, the Biden administration has proposed a minimum 21% corporate tax. I do believe if we're going to tackle the issues of income and wealth inequality and really make the investments necessary in our countries and regions, we do need to better harmonize, because we all know capital can just flow, you know, jump from one place to another. The sooner we can get on the same page on some of these things, the better. Otherwise, there will be a race to the bottom. People will look for tax havens, and it will just make all of our jobs much harder when it comes to addressing these fundamental questions. And finally, I do think that the China challenge is real. Again, I think we need to focus on better coordination and getting our own act together, but also coordinate in the ways we've talked about going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Senator. Dr. Ahn.
Yes, of course, there's a whole battery, I'm sure, of issues that everything is a priority. But I'll mention one thing which is near and dear to my heart, which is better public-private partnerships on sanctions implementation. There's a lot of concern about, the rise of the digital renminbi and how this can, erode the resilience of the U.S. dollar as reserve currency of choice. Actually, in some ways, that's a large misconception. It's not the U.S. dollar's dominance per se, but rather the competitiveness of Western, so both U.S. and EU financial services as the key driver of the potency of economic sanctions. In a shameless plug to some findings from my recent research paper, The Sword and the Shield. So it is more essential than ever that to maintain that potency and to maintain that competitiveness, that the US and the EU work together, not just at the government level, but also with the private companies that are actually doing the hard work of implementing the sanctions to maintain that competitiveness and ensure that sanctions remains a key sort of and potent tool in the arsenal of economic statecraft on both sides of the Atlantic.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We look forward to reading your paper. And I think just as we wrap up here, we are on this eve of the social summit in Portugal. And what I would say from my vantage point is the overwhelming extent to which social policies in Europe have actually informed some of the fiscal packages that we've had here. And really thinking about improving that social safety net that the Senator mentioned to be able to capture those that have been left behind in this truly K-shaped recovery. I think that's critical as we continue to engage and thinking about building back better in digital, those left behind in digital, and also the new green economic recovery. So I want to thank our extremely distinguished panel, Senor Ambassador, Senator, and Dr. Ahn for joining us today and wishing you all a fantastic rest of the conference. Thank you so much.